Your blind date didn't show up either? A single mom whispered. What happened next left the Millionaire CEO speechless. Have you ever wondered if fate has a sense of humor? If you've ever been stood up, felt alone in a crowded room, or believed true love wasn't in the cards for you, this story might just change your perspective. Before we dive in, if you're enjoying these real-life romance stories, hit that like button and subscribe for more heartwarming tales that prove sometimes life's disappointments lead to unexpected blessings. The rain pelted against the windows of Bellini's, one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. James Chen sat alone at a corner table, checking his watch for the 5th time in 15 minutes. The reservation had been for 7 p.m. It was now 7:45, and his blind date was nowhere to be seen. James wasn't accustomed to waiting for anyone. As the CEO of Horizon Technologies, people waited for him. His time was calculated in thousands of dollars per hour, and here he was, wasting nearly an hour on someone who couldn't be bothered to show up, or even send a text. He'd agreed to this setup only because his sister had been relentless, insisting he needed someone real in his life, not another power-hungry executive looking to climb the corporate ladder through marriage. He signaled to the waiter, ready to pay for his untouched glass of scotch and leave, when he noticed her. 3 tables away, a woman sat alone, periodically glancing at the entrance. She wore a simple blue dress, nothing like the designer outfits he was used to seeing at his corporate events. Her dark hair was pulled back in a loose bun, a few strands framing her face. What caught his attention wasn't her appearance, though she was undeniably beautiful in an understated way. It was the quiet dignity with which she sat alone, occasionally smiling at the waiter who came to refill her water glass. She, too, had been waiting for someone who wasn't coming. Something compelled James to stand up. Later, he would tell their children it was the best impulse he'd ever followed. "Excuse me," he said, approaching her table. "I couldn't help but notice you seem to be waiting for someone." She looked up, startled. Her eyes were a warm amber, tinged with embarrassment. "That obvious, huh?" she replied with a self-deprecating smile. "Only because I'm in the same boat," James admitted. "Your blind date didn't show up either?" The woman's eyes widened slightly, and then she laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to brighten the dimly lit restaurant. "A single mom isn't exactly prime dating material," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Those 7 words would change James Chen's life forever. "I'm James," he said, extending his hand. "Ellie," she replied, her handshake firm despite her evident nervousness. "Ellie Ramirez. Would you mind if I joined you, Ellie? It seems a shame for both of us to eat alone when we could share a meal and commiserate over our mutual abandonment." She hesitated, studying him. James was used to people seeing his expensive suit, his Rolex watch, the trappings of wealth that usually defined him in others' eyes. But Ellie seemed to be looking at something else entirely. "I should warn you," she finally said, "I only have about an hour before I need to relieve my babysitter." "Then we'd better order quickly," James replied, taking the seat across from her. What began as a chance encounter between 2 stood-up singles evolved into the most refreshing conversation James had experienced in years. Ellie was a kindergarten teacher who spoke about her students with such passion that James found himself captivated. She didn't ask what he did for a living until they were halfway through their entrees, and when he told her, she simply nodded and continued telling him about the community garden project she'd started at her school. "My son, Noah, is obsessed with growing things," she explained. "He's 6 and can name more vegetable varieties than I can." "He sounds remarkable," James said sincerely. "He is," Ellie replied, her face softening with maternal pride. "He's the reason I do everything." As she spoke about Noah, James realized something profound was happening. For the first time in his adult life, he was having dinner with someone who didn't want anything from him. Ellie didn't know about his net worth, his company's market position, or the 3 properties he owned. She was simply sharing a meal with a man named James who, like her, had been stood up on a blind date. When the check came, Ellie reached for her purse. Please, James said. Allow me. That's very kind, but I can pay for my meal, she insisted. I know you can, he replied. But I'd like to. Not because I'm trying to impress you, but because this has been the most enjoyable evening I've had in longer than I can remember. Something in his tone must have convinced her, because she relented with a gracious nod. As they walked out of the restaurant, the rain had stopped, leaving the city streets glistening under the streetlights. I should get a cab, Ellie said, checking her watch. I can drive you, James offered, then quickly added, or I can call my driver to take you home, if you'd be more comfortable with that. Ellie's eyebrows rose. Your driver? James winced internally. He hadn't meant to reveal that particular detail yet. Yes. Part of the job, he explained awkwardly. To his surprise, Ellie laughed. You know, when my friend set me up on this blind date, she said he was financially stable. I'm guessing that's not how people would describe you. Probably not, James admitted with a smile. I appreciate the offer, but I'll take a cab. Noah gets anxious when I'm late. James nodded, respecting her boundary. May I call you sometime, Ellie? She studied him again with those perceptive amber eyes. Why would you want to do that? I'm sure you have supermodels and heiresses lining up to date you. Because none of them would have spent 15 minutes telling me about a 6-year-old's vegetable garden, he replied honestly. And I can't remember the last time I enjoyed a conversation this much. Ellie seemed to consider this, then pulled a pen from her purse and wrote her number on a napkin she'd taken from the restaurant. I'm not looking for anything complicated, she warned. Noah comes first, always. I wouldn't expect anything less, James replied, carefully folding the napkin and placing it in his wallet. As Ellie's cab pulled away, James stood on the sidewalk feeling strangely light. He'd gone to dinner expecting to endure another tedious setup, only to find someone, unexpectedly genuine. What James didn't know as he watched her cab disappear into the night was that Ellie had almost cancelled their impromptu dinner multiple times during their conversation. Every time he mentioned something that hinted at his wealth, the international conferences, the executive retreats, the casual reference to his home in the city's most exclusive neighborhood, she'd mentally prepared her exit. Ellie had been down this road before, with Noah's father, a man who had promised the world and disappeared the moment parenthood became real. She'd sworn never to put herself or Noah in that position again. Rich men, in her experience, wanted uncomplicated relationships, and a single mother with a kindergarten teacher's salary was the definition of complicated. Yet something about James had kept her seated at that table. Perhaps it was the way he listened, truly listened, when she spoke about Noah. Or maybe it was how he'd seemed more impressed by her community garden than she'd been by his Fortune 500 company. The following morning, as Ellie helped Noah get ready for school, her phone chimed with a text message. Thank you for salvaging what would have otherwise been a wasted evening. Would you and Noah like to visit the botanical gardens this weekend? They have a new children's exhibit on vegetable cultivation that might interest him. James. Ellie stared at her phone, torn between caution and the undeniable warmth that spread through her chest. Noah peered over her shoulder. Who's James, Mommy? And can we go see the vegetables? And that was how, despite her reservations, Ellie found herself agreeing to meet James Chen for a second time, this time with her son in tow. The botanical gardens outing revealed sides of James that Ellie hadn't glimpsed during their dinner. He arrived in jeans and a casual button-down shirt, looking far more approachable than he had in his tailored suit. More importantly, he got down on Noah's level, listening with genuine interest as the boy excitedly identified every plant in the children's garden. You know a lot about plants for a businessman, Ellie observed as Noah ran ahead to examine a particularly impressive pumpkin. My grandfather was a farmer before he immigrated to America, James explained. He never lost his love for growing things, even after he built his electronics repair shop. I spent my summers with him until I was Noah's age. What happened then? Ellie asked, noting the shadow that crossed his face. He died. Heart attack. My father took over the business, transformed it into an electronics manufacturing company, and the rest is corporate history. James shrugged, but Ellie sensed there was more to the story. You miss him, she said softly. James looked surprised, as if no one had ever made such an obvious observation about his feelings before. Every day, he admitted. He was the last person in my family who cared more about people than profit margins. Before Ellie could respond, Noah came running back, tugging on James's hand. You have to see the carrots. They're purple. James allowed himself to be led away, and Ellie watched as this powerful CEO crouched beside her son, expressing appropriate amazement at the purple carrots. Something shifted in her heart, a small crack in the protective wall she'd built around herself and Noah. That afternoon marked the beginning of what would become a careful dance. James began to integrate himself into their lives with a patience that surprised Ellie. He never pushed, never assumed, never tried to impress them with his wealth. Instead, he showed up, consistently, reliably, with thoughtful gestures that spoke volumes. When Noah mentioned his fascination with space during a dinner at their modest apartment, James arrived the following week with passes to the planetarium. When Ellie casually commented on her school's underfunded library, books began arriving, not from James directly, but from a community donor who wished to remain anonymous. 3 months into their relationship, Ellie finally confronted him about it. You're the mysterious donor, aren't you? She asked as they walked through the park, Noah running ahead to feed the ducks. James had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I wanted to help, but I knew you wouldn't accept it if it came directly from me. Why not? She challenged. Because you're fiercely independent, Ellie. It's one of the things I admire most about you. You don't want to be taken care of, you want to be a partner. His perception stunned her into silence. He was right, of course. After Noah's father had abandoned them, leaving her to navigate pregnancy and early motherhood alone, Ellie had promised herself she would never depend on anyone else again. I'm not trying to buy your affection, James continued when she didn't respond. When I see a need I can easily fill, it's hard not to act on it. Ellie considered this. I appreciate that, James. But relationships need balance. I can't give you expensive gifts or donate libraries. You've given me something far more valuable, he said quietly, watching Noah laugh as the ducks squabbled over bread crumbs. You and Noah have brought joy back into my life. Before I met you, I had success, but not happiness. It was the most vulnerable she'd ever seen him, and it melted another layer of her resistance. Yet challenges remained. James's world and Ellie's existed in parallel universes that occasionally collided in uncomfortable ways. The first time he invited her to a corporate gala, Ellie spent weeks agonizing over what to wear, finally settling on a dress that cost more than her monthly rent, a splurge she justified as an investment in her professional wardrobe. The evening was a disaster. James's colleagues' wives eyed her with thinly veiled curiosity, their diamond-draped necks craning to whisper as she passed. One woman, after learning Ellie was a kindergarten teacher, had actually patted her hand and said, "How refreshing for James to date someone so grounded." Ellie had excused herself to the bathroom and cried, feeling hopelessly out of place in James's world. When he found her later, eyes red-rimmed despite her efforts to repair her makeup, he'd immediately taken her home, apologizing profusely. I should never have brought you there, he said as they sat in his car outside her apartment building. Those people, they're not worth your tears, Ellie. They're your colleagues, your friends, she pointed out. Business associates, he corrected firmly. And if they can't see how extraordinary you are, that's their loss. But that's your world, James. Those galas, those people, that's the environment you live in. I don't fit there. Then maybe it's time I changed my environment, he replied, with such conviction that Ellie almost believed him. The following week, James didn't call. Ellie told herself it was for the best, that they'd been fooling themselves thinking they could bridge their different worlds. Noah asked about him daily, and each time, Ellie's heart broke a little more as she made excuses for James's absence. Then, on Friday afternoon, as Ellie was helping her students clean up from art class, the school secretary appeared at her classroom door. "There's someone here to see you, Ms. Ramirez. He says it's urgent." Ellie's heart raced as she hurried to the front office, only to find James standing there, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. His usual impeccable suit was replaced by casual clothes, and he hadn't shaved in what appeared to be several days. "James? What's wrong? Are you okay?" "I resigned," he said without preamble. Ellie stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "You what?" "I resigned as CEO of Horizon Technologies. Effective immediately." She guided him to a bench in the empty school hallway, stunned. "Why would you do that? Your company is your life's work." "No," James said firmly. "It was my father's life's work. I just inherited it and made it bigger. And in doing so, I've spent 15 years surrounded by people who value me for what I can do for them, not who I am. But to just quit." "I didn't quit working entirely," he clarified. "I've retained my seat on the board and my shares in the company. But I've appointed my COO as the new chief executive. She's been ready for years, and frankly, she's better at it than I ever was." "I don't understand," Ellie said, trying to process this dramatic change. "What will you do now?" James took her hands in his. "That's why I'm here. I've spent the past week setting up a foundation, the Chen Family Foundation. Its mission is to fund educational initiatives in underserved communities, starting with school gardens and libraries." Ellie's eyes widened as she began to understand. "I want you to run it with me," he continued. "Your experience as an educator, your passion for community development, you're exactly what this foundation needs." "What I need?" "James, I can't just leave my students." "Not immediately," he assured her. "The foundation won't be operational for several months. I'm asking if this is something you'd consider for the future." "A partnership, Ellie. Professional and..." He hesitated. "Personal, if you'll have me." Ellie felt tears welling in her eyes. "You changed your entire life. Because of me?" "Because of what you showed me," James corrected gently. "That success isn't measured in profit margins or market share. It's measured in purple carrots and children's laughter and making a difference in lives that matter." 6 months later, the Chen Family Foundation opened its doors in a renovated warehouse downtown. Its first initiative? Funding garden-based learning programs in 20 schools across the city's most economically disadvantaged neighborhoods. Ellie continued teaching that first year, helping design the foundation's educational components in her spare time. James, meanwhile, discovered a passion for hands-on community work that his corporate role had never satisfied. He could often be found in overalls, helping build raised garden beds alongside volunteers, many of whom never realized the unassuming man covered in dirt was worth millions. Noah thrived with James in his life, blossoming under the attention of a man who treated him not as an obligation or an afterthought, but as a person worthy of respect and guidance. When James finally proposed to Ellie, it was Noah who carried the ring, solemnly presenting it to his mother in the community garden where they'd spent so many happy weekends. "We're already a family," James said as he knelt before her. "I'm just asking to make it official."